Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the second of our Season 2 FIP Insider webinars. The coronavirus crisis, which we're all sick of hearing about by now, has had a dramatic impact on our lives and our businesses. We've all had to make drastic and sometimes uncomfortable changes to the way that we live and work. The Big Issue is one of the world's largest and most respected social enterprise businesses. Founded in 1991 by John Bird, it offers homeless people the opportunity to generate income and so to assist them in the move back towards permanent housing. The magazine now has editions in a number of countries across the world, and John Bird now sits in the House of Lords, where he continues to campaign on social issues. The coronavirus crisis, with its combination of lockdown and the risk of infection to the street vendors, has created almost the perfect storm of conditions to adversely affect the way the Big Issue works. So today we'll be hearing how they've risen to this challenge and made some fundamental changes to the way the business works, both now and for the future. But before I introduce my guest, let me run through some housekeeping items. As ever, today's session is a Q&A. It's a conversation. We're very keen to include you in the conversation and to take questions from as many of you as possible. If you look in your webinar controls at the bottom of the screen, you'll find the Q&A button. If you go in there, you can submit your questions, and you can also upvote other delegates' questions and make comments on them. And we're very keen that we get as many of those as possible. There is also a chat box, which can also be accessed in your webinar controls. Some of you have found that already. You can use this to chat either privately with myself and the speaker, or with the other attendees, and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the event. I recommend that you keep it open because the FIP team will be posting comments and useful links as we go along. These events and the work that FIP does to share knowledge across the industry would not be possible without the support of our corporate partners, PressReader, one of the world's largest digital content distribution businesses, and UPM, the world's leading biofor company. We thank them both for their support. I'd also like to thank FIP's members for the support you give to the organization. A reminder that in July, we'll be putting most of our content behind a members-only wall on our website. So for those of you who are not members, if you want to continue making use of the knowledge and insight that we provide, we would encourage you to join. Membership starts from as little as £50 a month, and you can contact me on james@fip.com for more details on how to do that. A reminder also that we've now released details of this year's FIP Congress, the highly anticipated FIP Congress. Our landmark annual event takes place online for the first time this year, and we've announced the first set of speakers, including James Wildman from Hearst, Vox Media's Erica Anderson, Mark Valder, the CEO of Ringier, and many more. You can see more details on this on www.fipcongress.com, and of course you can book your tickets there too. Tomorrow you'll all get a post-event email with more details, and of course everything is on our website, fip.com. If you've not already done so, I recommend signing up to the FIP newsletter. That way you can be sure you're never going to miss a session. I think that's enough from me, so it's time to introduce today's speaker. My guest today is the MD of The Big Issue, Russell Blackman. Having worked for Dennis Publishing for 15 years in a variety of roles, latterly as group publisher of their fitness division, Russell joined The Big Issue in 2016 as MD, where he's responsible for all publishing and business development activity. Russell, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Great, glad to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit about The Big Issue. We've got an international audience who may not be familiar with the brand, may not be familiar with the service that you provide and the enterprise that you have. Just tell us about its origins and its fundamental purpose.
Yeah, well, first off, James, I'd like to say and just a big thank you to you and also FIP for having me today. It's always great to be able to talk about the story of The Big Issue, and certainly right now how we're currently working through this crisis. So, but for those that aren't familiar with The Big Issue, it's Big Issue is street paper that is sold by anyone who is encountering poverty, essentially. So they're often homeless or vulnerably housed, and they buy the magazine from The Big Issue, and then they sell it on to their customers as a means to essentially work their way out of their situation, out of their predicament. I think, the Big Issue today is very much part of the social fabric of this country. It's inspired a similar movement of street papers around the world, as you mentioned just now. So there are actually over 120 street papers in 35 different countries. And there are also 5 other big issues situated in Australia, South Africa, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And as you mentioned just now, it was launched back in 1991 by our founder and editor-in-chief, John Bird, and it was also financed by Gordon Roddick, who's the husband of the late Anita Roddick, the founder of the Body Shop that people would have heard of. And at the time of it launching, it turned the media and publishing landscape absolutely on its head. And at the same time, it was able to empower the lives of thousands of the most vulnerable in the UK. And it was essentially a work-based solution to tackle a social crisis, which at the time was all the growing problem of rough sleeping in London. But it was a very, very different approach to all the other services that were trying to tackle and support the homeless at that time. But over the past 30 years, we've sold well in excess of 230 million copies of the magazine. And pre-COVID, we'd be selling on average across the year about 11,000 copies every single day. So, and through this mechanism, this unique mechanism, this hand up, not a handout, we've been able to support well in excess of 100,000 of the most vulnerable in the country to earn a legitimate source of income. So it really is an incredible business, an incredible story, and it's I'm proud certainly to be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you use the great phrase there, empowering vendors. I mean, everybody who lives in the UK will have interacted with a big issue vendor at some point in their lives, and of course, many around the world will as well. Just describe the experience of being involved with the big issue from a vendor's point of view. I mean, what is it like for them?
Well, I think, first off, I think for a brand that is so well known and so respected for being this sort of genuine force for good, I think it's often a business that is misunderstood. And I think there's a lot of different sort of differing of the public perceptions about it, how it works, the business model. There's a lot of stigma, I think, that surrounds our vendors who are essentially deciding to take a really, really positive step forward, even though they're in a terrible, dire situation, and effectively go out and get a sales job and run their own small business. So every big issue seller that you see out on the streets is effectively running their own micro business. So they buy the magazine upfront for 50% of the cover price. So effectively the big issue acts as the wholesaler, and then they sell it on to their customers, and the difference they make is their income. So like any small business, they're having to manage their stock control and cash flow. So it's not sale return, they are committed to that stock that they buy, and they have to manage this very carefully to build up their regular income. But it's not just about the money that they earn. It's also about that kind of vital human connection that they have with the public, with their customers, within that transaction, the giving and the taking. So selling the magazine, gives our vendors, structure to their lives, because a lot of our vendors' lives are utterly, chaotic, and it gives them a sense of purpose and a sense of dignity. And also, ideally, it looks to build confidence and skills to help move them forward to more stable work and ultimately more stable lives.
I mean, I guess it makes them feel part of communities that otherwise they've been excluded from. I mean, we all have the regular big issue vendor that we see on our way to work or on our regular kind of shopping route or whatever, and they're very much a part of the social scene in our towns and cities, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great model, and it really works fantastically well, except that, of course, it must have been severely impacted by the crisis that we're going through at the moment, particularly the crucial part involving the street vendors. What's been happening to them during this period of lockdown?
Well, it was on the Friday before the lockdown, March the 20th, that we had to make the decision, a significant, unprecedented decision to stop printing the magazine, and also to stop vendors selling on the streets for their own safety and the public. So, and based on the nature of our business, we don't have an income if we don't have a street, and the livelihoods of our vendors, as well as the future of the magazine, has been genuinely under threat. And it meant that, like, overnight, our vendors' means to earn a legitimate kind of income vanished. So I think, we can all agree that it's been, a hugely challenging kind of 3 months for all of us, let alone someone that is already living in extreme poverty, very much living hand to mouth, and often with underlying health conditions due to their circumstances. So for our vendors, it's been a desperate situation, and they've had to seek safe accommodation by either their own accord, whether that be through their through family or friends, or they would have been supported by the government as part of their sort of the Everybody In campaign, which was their strategy to get all homeless people into safe accommodation through hotels and B&Bs, you see. But as a business, I suppose that the big issue was already very aware of the challenges we faced as a media organisation. As a print-based product, reliant largely on cash transactions sold on the high street. So this crisis has only accelerated the trends that were already there and affecting us, but also it's meant that we accelerated our work and our decision making to ensure that we can create a more sustainable business for the long-term future.
It's such a common theme that we're hearing everywhere, that this is accelerating the trends that we've already seen. And obviously, I guess many of us hadn't thought about that, the move to a cashless society and what that means for vendors. Before we get on to what that's meant for you as a media business and how you've responded, it's impossible really to talk about the big issue without talking about the social issues that underpin this and the kind of impact that coronavirus has had on that. It must presumably be very frustrating as a brand to have campaigned for 30 years on the issue of homelessness, to have been told by successive governments that nothing could be done, only to find that suddenly that isn't the case when a crisis like this comes along.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as you say, John Bird and The Big Issue have been campaigning tirelessly over the last kind of 30 years that nobody should have to suffer the human rights abuse of sleeping rough. And this was now the first time that the government had taken responsibility for people that they had ignored for decades. So I mean, obviously for us, our main concern was for our vendors. Between 1,500 and 2,000 vendors that will sell the magazine on any given week, but they rely on us each day, and many of them have underlying health conditions. So we were deeply worried that they were at major risk. But I suppose it's really important to highlight the fact that the wider issue here, that is, there are now 14,000 roughly rough sleepers nationally that are currently being housed in hotels and accommodation such as B&Bs, and it is still unclear what plans the government has to ensure that these individuals are not simply left to go back to the street once the evictions ban is lifted in August and so forth. So I saw that there was an announcement yesterday in the news, I read it in the news yesterday, that the government will be now handing out an additional 105 million pounds to local councils to support rough sleepers. But clearly, again, this is not going to be a long-term solution, and it will act as a stopgap while they work out longer-term kind of policies. But I think what is most alarming is the potential fallout from COVID, because it's not going to be just about finding homes for the people who are on the streets before the crisis. We in last week's magazine, we did a large kind of feature on this, but the District Councils Network, which is a membership kind of body based in England, has estimated and warned that potentially up to 500,000 people could be pushed to the brink of homelessness as a result of the fallout. So, for the big issue, we will obviously continue, and John will continue in the House of Lords, will continue to campaign tirelessly to ensure that, the days of rough sleeping should remain in the past. We should not go back to that, but it ultimately looks like, that unfortunately, that the big issue will be even more relevant and more beneficial for more people, 30 years on after it launched, to try to tackle this problem.
I mean, you must be unique in being a business, the only business in the world where the larger you are, the more of a problem it is. I mean,
Yeah,
you almost want to not exist at all, don't you?
absolutely. I suppose like any social enterprise, any social mission-led business is ultimately, striving to make ourselves all redundant.
And you've talked about campaigning, your role in campaigning to ensure that vendors are not forgotten, and that rough sleeping generally is not forgotten when the crisis ends. What are you doing as we emerge from lockdown to help vendors get their businesses up and running again? So, like any small business, they will have been affected with cash flow and all the rest of it. What are you going to do to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, with the impact COVID has had on our vendors, their enterprising route to work out themselves out of poverty kind of disappeared. The founding kind of philosophy and the core ethos of the big issue is about creating a hand up, giving a hand up, not a handout. It's about giving people that are encountering poverty the tools to solve their own problems. So in the first instance, as we emerge from it, we've had to make a seismic shift in the way that we are operating and also supporting our vendors to ensure that we can get them through this crisis. And in order to do that, we created a new means to get cash and food vouchers, for instance, directly to our vendors through various other sort of business activities, such as subscriptions, retail sales, app sales, and so forth, which I'm sure I can come on to in a bit. But
yeah,
what's really positive is that our plan, we now have a plan to get vendors selling on the street again. And that will happen hopefully from Monday, the 6th of July.
Oh, okay, great.
And as part of our work to support them back, we've essentially created a back to work program, which includes welcome back kits for our vendors so that they can aim to build up their business and build their income back safely. So we're going to be supplying them with PPE kit. We'll actually be offering them 10 free magazines to get them started again. And also we're going to be supporting them as many as possible to sell through, contactless readers, selling cashless through a partnership that we have formed with iZettle over the last 18 months.
How have you solved that cashless problem? Are you giving them devices that they can use to take payments? Is that how it works?
Exactly. So we're going to be, obviously, in order to have a contactless reader, there's a certain level of criteria that one needs to meet. Often certainly ID, a fixed address, a smartphone, etc., etc. So, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes from our frontline kind of teams to ensure that we are supporting our vendors to essentially attain a contactless reader and making sure that they have everything they need in order to be able to sell through cashless. But it's a challenge, and it will take time because of their predicament, their situation.
So I guess there's our first action point for everybody listening. 6th of July, go and find your local big issue vendor and buy a copy of the magazine from them, and that will help them get back on their feet again. I want to go back to the start of the crisis in the UK. So March the 23rd, Boris Johnson announced lockdown. What was your immediate reaction as MD of the business? You can swear.
Well, yeah, I think I might. It's actually the Friday before. So for us, it was the news took hold, and we had to react on the Friday the 20th. John Bird had received a call from the government, basically giving us the heads up that this lockdown was imminent, and that there was now going to be a strategy in order to get all kind of homeless and vulnerably housed people into safer accommodation. So, first of all, it was a hell of a lot to take in, and our immediate reaction was one of concern for our network of vendors. So as I said before, selling the big issue for 2,000 vendors each week is an absolute vital lifeline. So we're all, deeply concerned about their safety and their livelihoods. And then, very, very quickly that afternoon and over that weekend, before the actual lockdown began on the Monday, we had to try and get in touch and contact as many vendors as possible to explain to them what has happened and the decisions that we've had to make, and also reassure them that we would be doing everything in our power to support them through this crisis. But I suppose from a practical point of view, it was a Friday afternoon, and we go to press on a Friday afternoon. So I quickly had to call our printers to see how far down the line we were. Fortunately, we were only 5,000 copies in, so I was able to press the big red button, because otherwise we'd have been exposed to our normal printing costs of 85,000 copies a week. And then I thought, crap, we're going to need to do something now in order to save the big issue and support our vendors, and we're going to need to do it very quickly indeed.
The vendors themselves must have been shocked, scared, worried. I mean, how quickly did you get that kind of feedback on the impact from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the impact was instant, because they were as very, very worried, that rely on the big issue as their sole means to earn any kind of living. The impact was also was instant, because unfortunately, we hadn't printed the next week's magazine for the following Monday, so they didn't have anything to sell. So it was a really, really worrying time for our vendors and all of our staff, and our focus was, as I say, just getting around, talking to as many as we could, and start to reassure them about how we will do everything we can to support them, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So over the course of that weekend and the following days, you had to react very quickly. What are some of the steps you had to take, and why did you choose to go down the route that you did?
Yeah, well, just to put some kind of context in terms of the lost revenue, I mean, collectively across our whole network of national vendors, they will make anything between 75 and 80,000 pounds a week. So it's on average, an average vendor would earn about 40 quid a week from their week sales. Obviously, some vendors sell a lot more and others quite a bit less than that. It's a tough job. But equally, this is the same level of income that the big issue was losing overnight on a weekly basis. And I think the most important thing is to stress is that the big issue isn't a charity, it's a social enterprise. And so we don't rely on any other government handouts. And our income and our social mission is fueled by commercial activity, like any other publisher. So the first steps were that we're going to have to use the product in a very different way in order to generate income for our vendors and our own survival. So our historical core purpose around a hand up is almost kind of a contradiction, because we were going to have to use our product in order to give them a hand out for this short-term period, and to ensure that we can be there in the future to provide them that hand up again. So we were informed, or we kind of knew that it is likely that it was going to be sort of a 3-month lockdown. So instantly we kind of pulled together an appeal kind of campaign. We launched a 3-month subscription offer, which has sold exceptionally well up until now, which is fantastic. Really overwhelmed by how supportive the public have been. I also, with the help of Market Force and some old kind of friends at my old employer, Dennis Publishing, started setting up retail deals. So I started doing some retail deals where creating alternative means for us to sell the magazine and get the magazine and money into the hands of the people that needed it the most. So the magazine's been available through kind of Waitrose, Co-op, Sainsbury's, and a number of others. Maximizing sales also meant creating a digital option too. So again, with some very kind support from an agency partner, PugPig, we launched a brand new HTML5 based app, so we can give out consumers as many options as possible during the lockdown. And as well as that, we created a new means for consumers and also corporate partners to offer one-off financial contributions as well.
Yeah. So almost that philanthropy model that works very well for the Guardian and others. So that's kind of your end, if you like, of what you've done to make sure that the business can still support itself and therefore support the vendors. How were you able to translate that into continuing to support those vendors when they're now not on the streets anymore in temporary accommodation? Did you provide some means for them to have an income throughout this period as well?
Yeah, I mean the big issue exists for our vendors. It's not the other way around. That's why we are here. That's why we exist, is for our vendors. That was the number one priority. So at the same time as launching the new product offerings, we launched a vendor impact fund, basically. So much like the original model, whereby essentially we share 50-50 on the cover price with our vendors. We set up an impact fund. So 50% of all of our sort of net proceeds that we were generating through subscriptions, app sales, retail, any of these kind of financial contributions, corporate kind of contributions, all went into this pot, basically. So our frontline teams were then able to very quickly work so hard to disperse this money to our vendors, which has been a challenge, but we've done it, and we've continued to do it, and we still will do it. And that comes in the form of cash payments. It's come in the form of food vouchers, a utility bill payments as well, and essentially anything else that they needed to get them through this time. Loneliness and the mental health issues surrounding this have been probably the biggest issue for our vendors, as well as this kind of financial kind of challenge. So, whether it's been a case of buying them a laptop so they can speak to kind of family and friends, or a Kindle so they could read, what have you. So we've done whatever we can to get them through this time.
I mean, that's fascinating. The mental health aspect is something that's coming up more and more in our discussions with publishers and with people who are working from home. And now, of course, is exacerbated again by the end of lockdown, which is causing more mental health issues as people are anxious about rejoining society or going back into society. Is that something you're going to have to help vendors with, their mental health, in terms of coming back to being a vendor again? Because it's quite a big step to go from being inside in a temporary accommodation when you've been on the streets for a long time, for 3 or 4 months, and suddenly being dropped back into your prior existence. I guess that's going to need a lot of hand-holding.
Absolutely, and we will be doing that. As I say, our priority is our vendors, and to ensure we can keep them safe through this crisis, and we can get them selling again safely to their regular customers, and hopefully some new customers off the back of this. And we provide all and any service and support that they will need in order to get back to that point.
We've had a question from the audience from Amir Safir. Thank you very much, Amir. Glad you're enjoying it. He's asking for a little bit more detail on the changes that you're going to make to the experience of vendors interacting with the public. Anybody who's been in a store in the last few days since they reopened will have seen plastic screens and all sorts of contactless payment and all this kind of stuff. We've talked a bit about the payment methods already, but what are you going to do to change the experience for the public and the vendors interacting with one another in line with what other retailers have done?
Yeah, well, so certainly in the kind of welcome back kit that we're creating and providing for our vendors, that kit will have everything a vendor will need to ensure they can say, we can reassure our vendors, but also we can hopefully reassure our customers that it's still very much so safe to purchase from our vendors, and to continue to support buying the magazine and supporting the big issue. So like PPE kit, contactless, other social distancing kind of assets that's going to be used to support vendors in order to sell in that way. Yeah.
Fantastic. A lot of those things that you're talking about in terms of the new ways of working for the big issue that you've had to bring in, the newsstand sales, subscriptions, that kind of stuff, they weren't part of the business before. What's been the biggest challenge during that time of bringing those things in?
Yeah. Well, I think like most businesses, we've had to do everything we can to, first of all, sort of manage our cost base, which has meant that we've had to take advantage of the furlough scheme. So one of the biggest challenges we've faced is that we've had to ensure that we can continue to provide the same level of support and get disperse funds, food vouchers out to our vendors, yet we're doing it on a vastly reduced sort of headcount and resource base in order to keep the business afloat, cash flow, during this period. But I think the other challenge that we've faced has also been about as we have pivoted the business, accelerated our digital as well as launching a fully fledged subscription service. We have needed to very quickly build out our skill sets and understanding in those areas as well, because they're not necessarily skill sets and knowledge bases that we did have or required to have prior. But for me, I think that out of any crisis there are always kind of opportunities, and we see this being a bigger part of our business and revenue mix as we move forward.
So you think that some of these new initiatives might carry on? We might see the big issue permanently on the newsstand, for example?
I think, the reality is that the big issue has always been, reliant on one kind of revenue stream, and like any business in this sector, certainly in the media world, it's absolutely vital that we continue to diversify our revenue to ensure that we can be here for people that need us the most now and in the future. And I think that, yes, I'm delighted. And the initial signs are that there's a lot of vendors that do want to come back from the sick, which is fantastic news. But we do think there's going to be sort of a phased return, a staggered return. And also we just don't know what the consumer demand is going to be like due to kind of current social distancing. So I think certainly in this sort of short to medium term, I think it's going to be really important for us to be able to continue to offer other ways in which people can support our work in dismantling poverty, whether that is due to the fact that they can't find a vendor local to them, or they simply choose to support in a different way. So certainly, in the short term, we will plan to continue to have a retail presence, but it would never be at the risk of undermining a vendor's sale. So our print order and our spread of stores that we're available in will be very much dictated around sort of the active postcodes that we have vendors positioned within and actively selling in communities.
Yeah, so you'll be filling in the gaps, not competing with your existing vendors.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's just talk a little bit about your digital initiatives, because I guess that's something that every media business is looking at the moment, the transition from print to digital. Just tell us a little bit about what your thinking is there in terms of the future of the big issues content online, and how that can then support the core purpose and the core mission.
Yeah. Well, I think the big issue is going to be more required than it ever has been before. And I think the big issue as an organization, a group of organizations, will emerge from this crisis with an even a deeper commitment to our mission, and hopefully an improved social model, a business model as well. And I think that's going to be driven a lot through digital and tech solutions. So, we're going to be looking at how we can develop new sales opportunities for vendors, for instance, to give them greater means to earn and work their way out of poverty. And we'll also be developing new products and services that can offer, financial and digital inclusion for a far greater number of vulnerable people as well. From a publishing and content perspective, we will, as you say, we will be accelerating our digital proposition. I think the big issue is a highly credible and trusted brand, and we will be taking a leading voice on an ever-expanding range of very complex issues, especially off the back of this kind of crisis. So there will be a large kind of focus around our digital acceleration within the business that can directly support our print product and our vendors, but also know that we there's an opportunity there to engage a wider profile of consumer as well, that don't necessarily interact with a vendor, or can't find a vendor that would be engaged with our content, and also willing to support through other alternative means. We've also recently launched our own content agency services. So, as we've seen a huge sort of shift towards purpose and mission driven organizations and brands that are actively looking for ways to differentiate themselves based on that, they're looking for highly credible and authentic platforms to help tell their story. So, coupled with our award-winning journalism, we're now creating multi-platform cause-based campaigns for brands to help them tell their stories. So through our digital acceleration, this will only give a greater value proposition for partners and extend our impact in the way that we can help raise awareness around very important issues.
So that's using your expertise and the expertise of 30 years of being in this business to help other socially minded enterprises or socially minded campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation, and we've spoken about it a couple of times in various webinars that we've run recently about what life might look like after lockdown more generally in society. What's your take on what we're going to look like when we emerge from this crisis?
Yeah, I think that society will no doubt look different. I think the way that people will go about their lives is very likely to change, and I think as a result, the big issue could look quite different to how it looked before. And I think the way that people want to engage with each other will be affected, and that may affect kind of our sales and so forth. But equally, we know that from a macro kind of perspective, there's going to be less money in the economy. It will be an increasingly sort of cashless society, and also there'll be many other people out there on the brink of homelessness. As a result of this crisis. Pre-COVID, obviously our primary aim has always been our vendors and continues to be our vendors. But equally, we need to be looking at other preventative measures, working with government, working with organizations to unite and create solutions to help prevent probably some big issue readers that are going to be at risk of becoming a big issue seller. So I think, this situation, I think it could look quite different, and it can have a big impact and effect on our business and also our vendors' lives.
Fantastic. We've got a couple more minutes left, and I've got a couple more questions to ask you. But before I do that, there's a couple of questions here from the audience. One from Tony Franks from Pocket Films. Hi, Tony. Nice to hear from you again. Who says, great work, Russell. The big issue has always had a strong focus on films. Tony's betraying his personal interest area here. With cinemas only opening on a restricted basis, is this part of your content going to change? And I guess also related to that, is your content mix going to change going forward as a result of things that we're seeing at the moment?
I mean, it has, the content mix has changed over this kind of period, and that's been reflected in some of our culture kind of content, and the fact that people are going to be largely in their homes, and it's reflected that. It's also, we've ran a whole series of kind of features every single week, which we called the COVID Crusaders. And this was all about us kind of bringing to light and raising the profile of all the incredible individuals, organizations, charities, businesses that are in the teeth of adversity, you know, putting their kind of foot forward and doing something really positive to support more vulnerable people. So the big issue has really enjoyed being able to tell those stories through the magazine each and every week. And I think, you know, as we move forward, there will be a shift in the content mix as well. I think what is absolutely integral is that we become more sort of action driven, more community driven as well. So there'll be more community based kind of content that is underpins sort of kind of core kind of content pillars. So yes, there will be sort of shifts, and also it will be informed as well through our digital development as well.
I've got a question here as well from another question from Amir. Thank you, Amir. And I'm going to paraphrase your question very slightly. How easy is it for, obviously we don't want more new vendors to the big issue because that implies that the homelessness crisis is growing, but for new vendors, what is the process of onboarding them? How easy is it for somebody to become a part of the big issue program? Are there issues, for example, with their chosen patch? Are they able to just turn up outside a railway station and sell? I mean, what's the kind of process there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's basically a lot of our doors are always open, and it's often a very sort of self-selecting kind of process in terms of who wants to sell the magazine. And so we have a number of different distribution offices and partner offices up and down the country. And so if there's a vendor that wanted, or a person that wanted to sell the magazine, they would get in touch with us. We would get an understanding of their current situation. We would look at available pitches. So it's not something that someone can just go and start selling on their own accord. This is, there are actual kind of pitches that are designated by our frontline teams that have been either kind of historical kind of pitches and sort of agreements in place, or where basically areas and pitches where we know are going to perform well, but based on kind of footfall and so forth. But as we move forward, you know, we think that there's a good chance that there will be more vendors, and we're creating a kind of almost like a community leader kind of role for other vendors that can act as a means to almost kind of mentor and support new vendors that are having to come through and sell the magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think that's pretty much all the questions we've had from the audience. Let me just ask you finally, there's going to be people out there who want to help the Big Issues mission and the Big Issues cause, apart from, of course, going out on the 6th of July and buying a copy or several copies, hopefully. How can they get in touch with you? How can they help the Big Issue right now?
Well, I think you've said the most important one. I think, you know, our vendors will be, you know, really value your support. So please, I urge anyone to go out, find their local vendor, support their local vendor, you know, have a conversation with them, find out more about them, and buy the magazine, because it's an incredibly good read as well. But as we've spoken about today, there is a huge amount of work to do. So, I mean, if you and also opportunities that we can create for all other organisations as well. So, you know, if you or your organisation are interested in our work, and you feel you could help us achieve our plans, please do get in touch directly with myself or James, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd very happily pass on those contact details. You've made a good point there as well, Russell. It's very easy to forget that the Big Issue is actually an award-winning magazine as well. It is a fantastic, high-quality product. So for everybody out there, just to recap, on the 6th of July, go out there, give your local vendor 20 quid, but also make it a habit. Go and buy an issue every single time that one comes out to support the enterprise. And if you do have any way that you can help the Big Issue with its mission, please do get in touch directly with Russell or myself. Russell, that was really interesting. FIP is very proud to support the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for all of that. And please thank all of your team as well on behalf of us for the work that they're doing at this time. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, James.
that's about it for today, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. We'll be back in a few weeks' time with a webinar on the US magazine market, which I'll give you more details of in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, oh, thank you, Yvonne. A nice comment there from Yvonne Schaff in South Africa. Such a brilliant project and well supported in South Africa. Thank you, Yvonne. Also, please do go and take a moment to look at FIP.com, sign up to the newsletter. You'll learn more about our work. Go and look at FIPcongress.com as well to find out about the forthcoming Congress. You can follow us on Twitter at FIPWorld and at FIPCEO, and you can follow the Big Issue on Twitter at Big Issue as well to learn about what they're doing. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.